Livingston Public Library, April is National Poetry Month, and there's no better time than now to get started reading and writing your own poetry. Today, fellow librarian Joe and myself are going to show you how to get started writing your own poetry. Now, poetry doesn't have to rhyme, it doesn't have to stick to a certain beat or meter, but it totally can. There's so many different ways to do it. It's a beautiful way to capture emotions, portray images, and try to make sense of the world.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm Joe from the Livingston Library, and I'm going to talk about different kinds of poetry that you can write if you're writing your own poetry. As Jessica mentioned, a lot of poems rhyme, and probably that's what a lot of people think of when they think of poetry, is something that rhymes. Indeed, a lot of the great poets of all time wrote rhyming poetry, from Emily Dickinson to Edgar Allan Poe to Dorothy Parker, and rhyming poems have a specific meter or rhythm and rhyme scheme that they follow. There are different kinds of rhyming poetry, like limericks. I'm sure you've heard some limericks in your time. But again, not all poems have to rhyme, although some poems do follow specific formats or meters or structures and use some elements of rhyme, like sonnets or villanelles or haikus, which again either have a certain number of lines or a pattern or number of syllables per line. You can tell a story with your poem. That would be called a narrative poem. If you wanted to tell a long story like the Iliad or the Odyssey, you can write an epic poem. Or if you want to tell a shorter story with your poem, you can write a ballad. If you want to pay tribute to someone with a poem, you can write an ode. Or if you want to pay tribute to maybe someone who has died and reflect on life and death, you can write an elegy. If you want to write a poem from a specific person's point of view, like a monologue almost from a play, you can write a soliloquy. You can write in blank verse if you want to follow a certain rhythm or meter but not bother with rhyme. You can write free verse if you want to not concern yourself with meter or rhyme at all and just write whatever you like and experiment. You can write a poem inspired by other works of art, like ekphrasis, which would be a poem that describes or contemplates, say, a painting. You can also write erasure poetry, which takes an existing text, like an old newspaper article or a passage from another book, and you then black out or erase most of the words in that text and leave behind a few carefully selected words so that the remaining words tell their own story or create their own original work. Of course, if you do use erasure poetry, I would hope you would cite the original source before or after your poem. So yeah, as you can see, there are lots of different styles of poetry you can work with, or you can not work with any of those styles and do your own thing. If you are going to write poetry, I would certainly recommend reading lots of poetry. Read as many different styles as you can. Read as many different poets and voices as you can. And read old poets, read new poets, read celebrated poets, read underground poets, and just find what voices resonate with you. And once you're ready to write, just write as much as you can and keep writing, experiment with different styles, and find your own voice and see what works best for you. And hopefully after you have written enough poems and maybe shared some poems and feel confident in what you've written, maybe you can go on to submitting them to journals. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute.
Now, when getting started writing your own poetry, one awesome idea is to explore other poems and poetry out there. One resource that I like is the Poetry Foundation, found at poetryfoundation.org. Another resource is Poems by the New Yorker, and a third is a YouTube page of Button Poetry, which offers emotional and relatable spoken word. Your library card also offers you access to Universal Class, which has an online Poetry Writing 101 workshop.
So in addition to the great resources that Jessica just mentioned, here are a few resources that I really enjoy. The first one is Prelude Magazine. It's online at preludemag.com. It publishes great poetry on its website and has also published print anthologies in the past. It's edited by two very talented gentlemen, Stu Watson and Armando Jaramillo Garcia, and it publishes a wide variety of poetry by a wide variety of poets. The common thread between all of them is that the work is generally very intelligent and very evocative, and I highly recommend this, Prelude. Another site I really like is Yes Poetry, online at yespoetry.com. As you can see from the skull here, it can be on the darker, edgier side of poetry if that's your thing, but also, again, publishes a wide variety of poetry by a wide variety of poets. It's extremely inclusive and edited by Joanna Valente and Stephanie Valente. Another resource here is Entropy, which is online at entropymag.org. And right here at the top of their page, there's a button called Where to Submit, because in addition to publishing a lot of great original work, including poetry, Entropy also regularly posts an exhaustive list of markets and publications that are currently looking for poems, from presses to chapbooks to individual poems. There's a whole list of what's open here. It mentions any deadlines if necessary, what they're looking for, what possible payment may be offered, and there's a link to each of the publications here so you can find more information about each place. And I can't stress that enough. If you are starting to submit poetry, always check out a publication before you submit there if you can. Try to get a sense of what they're looking for and make sure that the work that you're writing is in sync with what they're looking for. There's another resource, Duotrope, at duotrope.com. That's duotrope.com. This is a database on all kinds of markets and publications that are open for submissions. It is a pay service of $5 a month, but you can sign up for a free trial just to see if that might be a useful resource to you. And there's a similar service called the Submission Grinder, which is available at thegrinder.diabolicalplots.com. Like Duotrope, it offers information on markets and publications that are looking for work, what they might pay, any other specific information that might be helpful. And again, this is a free resource. And now Jessica and I thought we might try to inspire you to write your own poems if you aren't already, by sharing some poems that we have written. So first, here's Jessica reading a poem she wrote called Taraxacum.
Taraxacum. I count the tiles on the wall like I count the minutes on the clock, breathlessly. I'll hold the air within my lungs and whisper little prayers, searching for the right syntaxal fragments of words. I'll skip over cracks and ramble off into the night. I will rip the roots of dandelions from the earth and scatter wishes into the wind recklessly, tempting fate and superstition, conjuring little deals with the devil to make you mine.
Thank you, Jessica. That was really good. And now it's my turn to share one of my poems. I'm going to read a poem from a series of poems I wrote a few years ago that I guess were combinations between odes and ekphrases. So each poem was simultaneously an ode to a famous woman from the 1920s, as well as inspired by song lyrics from a song by a famous band from the 1990s. So the poem I'm going to read is called Greta Garbo, Behind the Counter in a Small Town, an ode to Greta Garbo, inspired by a song by Pearl Jam called Elderly Woman Behind the Counter in a Small Town. Greta Garbo behind the counter in a small town. I swear I recognize those eyes, shy behind her giant sunglass shades. Little gestures blow like gale force winds, drifting, familiar, yet never dreamed she'd eat here. Diamonds in her bones, glimmer through her pores. She wants to be alone, I know, so her face may cast its spells. Yet I just want to scream, Happy anniversary of your eternal sorrow. Or let's fall in love and you can be the boss. I could be your housekeeper and your walking companion. But now here comes her check. She leaves 100 for coffee and key lime pie and walks out of my life forever. Glamour and glory, they fade. Mystique never dies.
So let's get started writing. Share your work in the comments below.